All right, hey guys, back and we're talking about Weber. And last video we talked about how he did sociology purely to develop concepts to understand history. And I alluded to the fact that for him, history is about interactions among people. He's not thinking about society having these great big structures. He's thinking about just you wake up in the morning and you see people and you interact with them in certain ways. And some of those events become great big historical moments. So in this video, what we want to understand is his view of human beings, the actors in these interactions. So first thing that we need to understand is that for Weber, human beings are meaningful actors. Remember, for Marx, human beings are creative and society gets in their way. And for Durkheim, human beings are passionate pleasure seekers, and so we need society to regulate us. For Weber, he's taking a much more neutral perspective on this. Human beings make meaning, and then so they decide what something means, and then they act on the basis of that meaning. It's as simple as that. He does believe, and this is worth saying, although we're not gonna spend a lot of time on it. He does say that not everything we do is meaningful. He distinguishes between what his terms, behavior on the one hand, and action on the other hand. Behavior is, for him, just a thoughtless reaction to things. Action requires us to think, to attach meaning to something. And so for him, sociological analysis is about understanding the actions of people in terms of the meaning it had for them. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. He talked about 4 different types of action, which is the rest of this. So human beings are you factor out the behavior part where we're just reacting. What's the basis of our action? Well, he says, okay, there are a couple of well, these two are linked together. They're both just actions, where these other two are rationality. We're going to deal with this first one. This is the least important to him, affectual action. And basically what it means is people act based on the emotion that they have in the moment. And he had very little else to say about it. Other sociologists later on, when we talk about interaction, will probably have more to say about it. But for Weber, well, that's it. We're not going to talk about it anymore. The second one is traditional action. And this one he did care a lot about because he was very interested in the idea of tradition, in the idea of people doing things. And tradition here means exactly what you think it means. It's the way we always did things, and so we're going to continue to do them that way. That idea is interesting to Weber because one of his maybe his most famous sociological work is called The Protestant Ethic and the Spirit of Capitalism. And in it, he makes the argument, he doesn't just explain why a particular type of Protestantism leads to a particular way of practicing capitalism. He does do that, but it's in the context of a much bigger study about why does capitalism happen in Europe? There's nothing inevitable about that. Sociology, remember, for him is just a means of understanding history, and for him, it's an amazing kind of just accident that it happens in Europe rather than in China, rather than in India, both places that had incredibly well-developed societies, and yet it doesn't happen there. So and part of the reason is tradition for him. That it was difficult for those societies to think in different ways because tradition was very important. But traditional action, like that's a fairly simple thing to understand as well. The last two are going to be, even though he's more interested in this than in this, these two are really where he's going to spend most of his time, and his depression is going to come because this becomes much more important than that. So, means and rationality is, I mean, if you were to think about it for just a moment, you could probably infer what it's about. The definition that he kind of gives is that action by an individual, remember, this is all individuals in interactions. So, this is you and me in an interaction. If I am acting based on means and rationality, my action is determined by expectations about you and how those expectations, how I can factor them in terms of rationally pursuing what I want. So the end is whatever my sort of rationally decided upon end is. And again, remember, he's not Marx, he's not Durkheim. It's whatever it happens to be. It's the meaning that I have made. But I am evaluating all the things in my environment in a way to get me to that end. That's what means and rationality is about to him. Importantly, it's worth pausing for just a moment to consider that this is super common to us, right? I mean, that's a lot of how we move around through our lives on a day-to-day basis, but also on a like your life kind of basis. The reason that most of you and the reason that I went to college was not out of some great love of learning for the sake of learning. I went there because it was a means end rational calculation that my likelihood of getting a job I enjoy or getting a job that pays well is greater if I go to college. So therefore, I will go to college. This is a classic means and rational calculation. We're tremendously used to that, but it's important to realize this is not the way human experience was necessarily for tons and tons of generations. It's not that it didn't exist. I mean, a hunter-gatherer would probably make rational means and rational calculations at times, but they were also guided very heavily by tradition. This is the way that we have done things. Religions function sometimes in a traditional way. I do this because I am of this religion and this is how we do things. It's not that we don't have that anymore, but basically over the course of history, this has loomed larger and larger and larger in, again, individual actors' minds and their decision making. Okay, let me see if there's anything else I need to get you about that. Action that is determined by expectations of objects and other human beings. Those expectations are used as means for the attainment of my ends. I got you all that. All right, so let's move on to value rationality. And here's where Weber's heart's going to start to break. Value rationality is action that is determined by a conscious belief in the value, a value of, like, I value equality or I value freedom or whatever, for its own sake, independently of its prospects for success. So, a classic example of this is during the civil rights era of the 1950s and 1960s, people marching knowing they are going to be beaten, knowing that they are going to have fire hoses and dogs turned on them, and doing it anyway. What Weber would say is that's not means to end rationality. That is, I might die, but I'm going to do it anyway because the value, independent of its prospects for success, is that important to me. There's nobility in this. There's not necessarily evil or selfishness in that. I mean, it's easy to think that way, but these two don't have to be polar opposites. But there's nobility in this. I'm going to do something even though I may pay a price for it, because in my mind, and remember, it's always in somebody's mind for Weber, it's the right thing to do. His heart's going to break because what he is going to see happening through the 19th and into the 20th century is this becoming a bigger and bigger deal, this becoming less and less important. All right, those are the four types of action for Weber. Remember, people are meaningful actors. Whether you consider a person intelligent or not, we're all attaching meaning to things and acting based on that meaning. And we can act in four different ways. It could be emotional, it could be traditional, it could be just means end calculating, or it could be based on some value that we hold. And that may be it. Let me see if there's... Oh, last point, just the conclusion, the exclamation point on the end of this, is that history then to Weber unfolds. And remember, history doesn't have to be grand things. It's the process of moving through time. History unfolds according to not so much this to him. Tradition, values, and increasingly rational self-interested decision making. Okay, so we can kind of get a sense that this could lead people to selfishness. This could too, but remember, he's not, and just because it's Weber, he does what he wants to do. He's not super interested in emotionality. But tradition and values are not about a self. They're not about me. They're about something bigger than me. The fact that we're here mostly is going to be an increasing focus on the individual, on the self. But Weber is going to say the problems are not just selfish individuals. The problems are going to become, what are the structures that people build based on that? That's what we'll get to in the next video.